Between the late 1870s and the early 1880s, a boy named Wilhelm Baumann was born in the industrial city of Rochester, New York. Historical records do not agree on the exact year. Some cite 1878, others 1881 or 1884, but that uncertainty itself reflects the world into which he was born, a working-class immigrant environment, far from the spotlight and rarely documented with precision. The Baumann family came from a German-American immigrant background, part of the great European labor wave that arrived in the United States seeking a better life. Rochester at the time was no glamorous city. It was a city of factories, warehouses, and railroad tracks, where physical labor was valued, and bodily endurance was often the only form of capital a person possessed. Wilhelm grew up in a world that was harsh but honest, where strength was not a symbol of masculinity, but a tool for survival. It was in this environment that Wilhelm's fascination with physical power began to take shape. Yet, unlike many boys who viewed strength solely as a means of labor, Wilhelm saw something else: performance. He was captivated by the posters of traveling exhibitions, images of massive men lifting impossible weights, breaking chains, or bracing sledgehammers against their chests. These shows regularly passed through industrial towns like Rochester, and to young Wilhelm, they were a window into a larger world. One figure in particular left a deep impression on him: Billy Sandow, the legendary European strongman, later hailed as the father of modern bodybuilding. Sandow was more than a display of raw power. He was an image. Well-groomed, disciplined, and carefully marketed, he presented himself as a living work of art, a fusion of athlete, actor, and cultural icon. To Wilhelm, Sandow proved a crucial truth: strength could be sold. The human body was not merely a tool of labor, it could be a product. As he grew older, Wilhelm began to grasp an idea that would eventually become the foundation of his entire career. He noticed that people did not pay simply to see who was strongest. They paid to feel something: wonder, tension, illusion. Audiences did not come for facts, they came for experience. From this realization emerged the earliest and most important lesson of his life. Audiences do not pay for strength alone. They pay for spectacle. This understanding did not come from classrooms or business manuals. It came from the streets, from faded posters on brick walls, and from the roar of crowds beneath canvas tents. Without realizing it, young Wilhelm Baumann's thinking had already moved beyond wrestling itself. He was shaping a worldview that would one day transform the entire industry of physical entertainment. In time, the world would know him by another name, a name chosen not to hide his past but to sell his future: Billy Sandow. Around 1902, Wilhelm Baumann left Rochester and headed for a city that was growing wild and ruthless: Chicago. This was a crossroads of everything: industry, immigrants, crime, and cheap entertainment. For a German-American youth with big ambitions, Chicago was not just a destination. It was a trial. It was here that Wilhelm first tasted the true world of show business. He entered the vaudeville circuit, where audiences paid not for honesty but for sensation. Every night, the stage was filled with magicians, dancers, comedians, and strongmen. Wilhelm found his opening there. He lifted heavy weights, snapped chains, and displayed raw physical power as spectacle. His body became a tool not for fighting, but for selling the illusion of strength. But Chicago taught him his first brutal lesson: strength alone was not enough. In this city, there were many strong men. The ones who survived were not the strongest, but the ones who commanded attention. So Wilhelm began to wrestle. He took the name Young Muldoon, borrowing the shadow of the great William Muldoon. The choice was deliberate. Wilhelm understood that audiences did not buy technique or statistics. They bought myth. By calling himself Young Muldoon, he was offering a promise, a continuation of old glory, new blood from an old legend. In the ring, he was competent, not spectacular, not dominant. And it was precisely there that his awakening came. He watched wrestlers with inferior skill earn more money because their names were better known. He saw promoters care more about posters than results. He saw crowds cheer not for who won, but for who they recognized. Slowly, Wilhelm grasped a bitter truth. A famous name is more valuable than pure skill. That realization pushed him to reinvent himself. Young Muldoon felt borrowed. Wilhelm wanted something iconic, so he chose the name Billy Sandow, inspired by the most famous strongman in the world at the time, Eugene Sandow. The name was not just a tribute, it was strategy. With a single word, he tied himself to an image of strength, discipline, and European physical authority, and it worked. But Sandow's most important education did not come from the ring or the stage, it came from behind the scenes. In narrow alleys behind vaudeville theaters, in filthy locker rooms, and at back tables in bars, he listened. He watched how promoters talked about pay, how gamblers whispered about outcomes, how one victory could be negotiated and one loss could be arranged. He learned that professional wrestling never existed in isolation. There was always money flowing, always interests colliding, and more often than not, the most powerful man was not the one standing in the ring, but the one deciding who got to stand there. It was in this period that Billy Sandow was truly born, not as a great wrestler, but as an observer, a manipulator, and a future architect of power. Chicago did not make him a champion. Chicago made him dangerous. Between 1910 and 1913, Billy Sandow stopped thinking like a wrestler who survived from one match to the next. He began thinking like a man who controlled the system. During these years, Sandow opened and managed several gyms and training schools, not merely places to lift weights, but spaces of selection: who was allowed in, who was worthy of promotion, and who would remain nothing more than background talent. All of it was decided by him. These gyms became living laboratories where Sandow observed the most important truth in the wrestling business: who could generate money consistently. From this position, Sandow learned athlete management the hard way. He scheduled training, decided when a wrestler should be exposed and when he should be hidden, and managed the stamina and injuries of his talent. He realized that a tired athlete was not just a physical problem, it was a financial loss. Every injury meant a canceled match. Every cancellation meant unsold tickets. Through painful and expensive experience, Sandow reached a fundamental conclusion: a champion is not just the best fighter, he is an asset that must be protected. He began limiting the exposure of his top men. Not every challenge was accepted. Not every town was visited. Not every opponent was allowed a chance. To Sandow, preserving an aura of invincibility was far more valuable than satisfying the ego of competition. This was where Sandow's philosophy hardened. He understood that the public does not buy truth, it buys belief. A champion had to look dominant, lose rarely, and always feel just out of reach. If a champion appeared too often, he became ordinary. If he was tested too frequently, he became vulnerable. So Sandow began practicing something radical for his time: control of the narrative. Slowly, he abandoned the mindset of an athlete who asks, "Who is my next opponent?" and replaced it with the mindset of a promoter who asks, "How long can this story be sold?" By the end of this period, Billy Sandow was no longer a wrestler struggling to survive a brutal industry. He had become an architect of power, someone who understood that in professional wrestling, true victory does not always happen in the ring. It happens behind the scenes, in schedules, contracts, and in the hands of the man who knows when to say no.